Well, hello and welcome to Race to 2020 Craziness in Iowa edition. I'm James Morrow here as always with my good friend Jack Houghton, and we are talking about the absolute insanity which has taken over the Democratic Party this week with the results in the Iowa caucus now showing a complete fall apart for Joe Biden, but also a complete fall apart of the Democratic Party's credibility as it claims to be, across things, able to run even a small vote in a provincial state in the middle of the United States. In a gym, in a bunch of high school gyms and church basements and town halls across this Midwestern state. And we are now seeing an almost sort of Soviet-level vote counting operation here, which is just Jack, tell us what's been going on.
Well, I think without a doubt this is the best Iowa caucus that we've ever had. It's simply brilliant, just from the theatrics of it. So essentially, they've switched to electronic voting.
Yep.
They've had massive issues with an app, by the way, which was developed in part by former Hillary Clinton staffer, which doesn't help the conspiracy theory.
Robbie Mook, the guy who was in charge of her failed data operation 4 years ago. But
so 10:30 at night, they're supposed to have the results.
Let's just first go give everybody a little bit of a taste of why Iowa is important. Iowa is two things. Number one, it's basically first in the nation for pre-selecting the Democratic nominee. Number two, it has 7 out of 10 reliability when it comes to about 70% of Iowa winners go on to be the Democratic nominee when it's a contested year. And the third thing is they run this insane caucus system where people have to go after work and stand in little groups and be counted and recounted to determine what their little precinct, their little high school gym, their little church basement group is going to send to head office as their delegates. So it's really important. It's also really nuts. And yesterday, the whole system broke down.
Yeah, so essentially the votes were supposed to be done by 10:30. That's traditionally every other Iowa caucus, that's how it's done. Then there's all these integrity issues that kept popping up with the app. People are questioning the results. And then the most incredible thing happened. Candidates, when they knew that there wasn't going to be a result, they rushed to the stage and they all started to declare victory at once.
They declared victory and left. And now, so here's the really interesting thing about this, too, is that going into this, Bernie Sanders, the socialist from New England, he was completely just going to walk away with this whole thing. But this has been such a huge problem for the Democratic Party because they don't want this guy going up against Donald Trump because, number one, he actually might win. Number two, he's terrible for the Democrat establishment. He's just as bad for establishment Democrats as Trump has been for, the whole Romney wing of the GOP. So what happened was a couple of days before even the poll, there was a poll by the Des Moines Register which had Bernie Sanders up on top. Joe Biden, the respectability candidate, former vice president, down at number 4. This poll was suppressed because there were data issues, and they weren't sure if they could release the data because, of course, they didn't want to, do anything to further spook the market. So then we get the poll happening here, and then suddenly, yesterday, we're all watching the results, and what happens? Oh, we've got some data issues here. We're not so sure if we're going to get results tonight. And so, again, it creates this chaos, but it's also this whole chaos, which is really, really bad for Bernie Sanders. So I've been saying for weeks now, how are they going to stop Bernie Sanders? Well, I think we're starting to get a taste of that here.
Well, something really interesting with the 2016 caucus was that they didn't actually release the total vote count. And that's something that Bernie did really well in. He actually beat Hillary, and then she came and walked away.
Because they rejiggered the formulas.
Because they rejigged the formulas. And so this year, and I do think the DNC, they're going out of their way to try and not look like some conspiratorial putting their, the puppet masters. I do think they're trying to go out of their way. And that's why this is so funny, because it gives off the impression that they're rigged to the whole thing. But then they tried to show the total vote count. In the end, that's all we had. All we had was Bernie on around, 1,800 or something like that, the total votes ahead. Nothing else by 10:30. They've just come in 10 minutes ago.
Literally 10 minutes ago, we've started to get some results.
But it's not the full results.
But it's not the full results. They've only given us 62% of the results.
It's
but
so
here,
good.
friends, with
It's
62,
so
we are allowed to give you 62% of the results. But this whole, and I want to talk a little bit more about all the conspiracy theories in a minute. But let's not leave everybody hanging. We've got basically Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, or Mayo Pete, as Jack likes to call him, in with a 27%. Bernie Sanders in at 25%, Elizabeth Warren in at 18%, and then Joe Biden, 15%. So low energy Joe Biden.
They're already killing him off in the media. Now, this is quite extraordinary because, look, there hasn't been that much love for Joe Biden from the mainstream. For some reason, they seem to be barracking around Elizabeth Warren, from what I can see. Every single editorial in the Times is either backing her or someone else. He's not getting much love, but he's also really failing to get the younger voters. And I think the Democrats are really worried that...
Are you surprised? Are you surprised? I mean, like
a little. I think he's the most electable.
He's
I am a little surprised.
He's 90 gajillion years old.
They should be pushing him.
He's 90 gajillion
years old. He's the only one that's going to be able to take down Trump.
He has, when he talks, he sounds like Grandpa Simpson.
Yeah.
In fact, we'll play a little bit of him talking about corn pop just now.
And I learned that it makes a difference. This was the diving board area, and I was one of the guards, and they weren't allowed to. There was a 3-meter board. If you fell off sideways, you landed on the darn cement over there. And Corn Pop was a bad dude. And he ran a bunch of bad boys. And I did. And back in those days, to show how things have changed, one of the things you had to use, if you used pomade in your hair, you had to wear a bathing cap. And so he was up on the board, wouldn't listen to me. I said, "Hey, Esther, you, off the board, or I'll come up and drag you off." Well, he came off. And he said, "I'll meet you outside."
They have a sense of what he's talking about. Yeah. Who knows? It's just always like this when he's out on the trail.
To get 15%, like we're talking about being below than the threshold. It's quite an extraordinarily poor performance.
Jack,
it's hard for him to cover.
He has been running for president.
They're saying that he's done. They're saying that he's cooked.
He has been running for president for 47 years.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's ever won a caucus or a primary. So the American people have seen Joe Biden run for president over and over and over again, and they don't like what they see.
Yep.
I can remember back in 1988. So I was a kid at this point, and I remember that he ran for president and he got busted for plagiarizing the British Labour leader at the time, Neil Kinnock's speeches about growing up the son of poor coal miners and, being the first in his family to get a university education and all of that. And, nobody liked him then, and he just keeps coming back and back and back. But he's yesterday's man, and so real.
But he's a centrist, and they've attacked him to the point, talking about his cognitive faculties. Yes, he looks to be quite
He's old.
He does. But at least he's not talking about these really radical socialist policies where somebody, even if they don't like Trump, they're not going to put the country in the hands of Elizabeth Warren.
No,
it's not going to happen.
But this is why I actually think that, Bernie would be the best nominee for the Democrats, because I think wouldn't it be great, Jack, to see an actual contest? Let's put up a real contest of ideas. Let us have a contest between capitalism and communism. Donald Trump the other day in an interview with Fox News, we might have a clip of it here.
Bernie Sanders.
Well, I think he's a communist. I mean, look, I think of communism when I think of Bernie. Now, you could say socialist, but did he get married in Moscow? And that's wonderful. Moscow's wonderful.
Might have been the honeymoon.
You don't think necessarily, well, whatever, but you don't necessarily think in terms of marriage, Moscow. And it's wonderful. I'm not knocking it, but I think of Bernie sort of as a socialist, but far beyond a socialist.
Elizabeth Warren.
At least he's true to what he believes. That's one thing.
He thought that basically when he thought of Bernie Sanders, he said, "I think he's a communist." And so I think that's absolutely right. So why not put those two against one another?
We've actually got a little bit of an update now.
Okay.
Although Pete Buttigieg leads the caucus results, Bernie Sanders is leading the popular vote, as we suspected.
Right, okay.
His count is now at 28,220 over Pete Buttigieg's 27,000. Now, this is only 62% of the results so far. Hilarious that we've only got 62% like a day later.
So,
but this is what we knew, that he was probably going to get the popular vote here, but Pete still got the lead in terms of the delegates.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So that's about how they cut up the delegates, but it also means that there's a big push on to basically delegitimize Sanders, I think, by the Democrat establishment.
Joe Biden's only on 14,000.
Joe's only on 14,000. So there you have it. So, nobody wants Joe Biden. There's a huge amount of love for Bernie, and that scares the Democrats, and they are doing everything they can to take momentum out of his sails.
Can we talk about what this does? Look, this was a disaster for the integrity of the Democrats. You know, a party that really wants to take control of every aspect of American life. They can't even organize a vote in a gym.
They want to reorganize the means of production, yet they can't organize a vote in a high school
only
gym.
They know a better system, an economic system than capitalism. And if you only trust in us and put all the faith, look, they can't even organize a vote without an app crashing.
Well, I mean, this
it's
and
very
you know,
funny.
and it is funny, but you know, the thing is, it's funny you mentioned, you know, that sort of slightly Marxist sort of talk here, because it does put me in the mind of what Stalin used to say about it's not the count of the votes, or not the count of votes that matters, but who counts the votes. You know, and I think that's what we're seeing here. And yet here we have.
Oh, look where Amy's at. Do you remember?
Klobuchar?
Yeah. Do you remember her victory speech yesterday?
Yeah.
She stood up there. She was the first off the blocks. Yeah. So it was really funny. It was as if there was like a jailbreak and they were all breaking free. All the nominees, as soon as they knew that there wasn't going to be any concrete data, because they know that the victory speech, that big Obama-esque speech that he gave when he won it, it gives you that wind in your sails to go into New Hampshire. So they all tried to do their own one, which is hilarious, because we had the way that the TVs were covering it. You had Warren talking over here, you had Joe Biden over here, then you had Amy over
I know,
here.
I had them all on split screens up in the office. It was hilarious. But, you know, it felt like you know, the sports day at a progressive preschool where everybody gets a prize, you know. Everybody went away with participation trophies in the Iowa caucus.
So despite claiming victory, let's have a look at what Amy's results are. She's only here at 12.6%. So that's despite saying, oh, we've done very well. She stood up there and all of her supporters are like, yay, what does this mean?
Yay.
I just find that incredible.
You know,
but I do think there's a broader issue as well with what this has done. This has really disadvantaged Pete Buttigieg. Because
how so? How do you think this hurt Pete? Because Pete's coming out on top here.
You needed a clear winner at the moment. Right now, it's such a disaster. That's the headline. The headline is it's a mess, and the headline is also, can you trust the results? What's really unfair is that Pete it looks like he's going to come out on top. Everyone could have gone away with their tails between their legs. Instead, you're in a situation where they all claimed victory. Yeah. No one knows what's happened. And now he doesn't get to take a stand and get the nation behind him. Because this is quite an incredible result. I think you and I, quite early, I don't think we gave him as much credit as he deserved. He has jumped up now. He looks like he's going to win Iowa.
Well, but
it's quite incredible. And he didn't get his moment. They stole it from him because the whole thing was bungled.
Look, we have watched the media cycle and the voters' interest basically flirt with and go on a couple of dates with and sort of briefly fall in love with, like an episode of The Bachelor, you know, candidate after candidate after candidate, and they've all gone up and then disappeared, up and then disappeared. I mean, you know, look, we've been around for Beto O'Rourke. You know, like, remember when he was the guy who was supposed to be, you know, everybody's darling, and now he's nowhere. I just think that Pete Buttigieg just doesn't have the experience, doesn't have the discipline, and also his ideas, for as much as he presents himself as mainstream, are pretty far out there.
But his message is sinking through, and I've got to say, when I see him talk, he's polished and he's succinct, and at least he knows what he is. You know, I'm not jumping on the Pete Buttigieg
train
particularly, but you got to respect the fact that he has come through. He's taken down a former vice president. He's taken down Bernie Sanders, who's been there since the dawn of time and has a massive base, and he's taken down Elizabeth Warren.
I wonder how much of that is, and somebody else I want to talk about in a second, I wonder how much of that is because of his skill as a politico, and how much of that is actually because they've just looked at everybody else and said, well, there's nobody else. So, you know, it's sort of like, you know, when the lights come on at closing time at a pub, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, hey, how are you? You know?
I think that's exactly what's happening. I think you're spot on here. I think he does come off as quite stable and normal, and I don't think he is as radical as some of the other options, but then he's younger than a more moderate like Joe Biden.
But I want to talk about somebody else who all of this chaos benefits too, and that is Mike Bloomberg, who didn't compete in Iowa right now, who has spent $300 million and has vowed to spend billions, I think, to get himself into the White House. Now, all of this chaos could wind up working to his benefit as well.
So how does that work if he's not involved in the delegate process at this stage?
He comes in later. He just picks up delegates later on.
So he just sacrifices 41 delegates in Iowa.
There's also the superdelegate process. And now,
Sure.
we've already seen that Bloomberg has changed the rules, or managed to buy his way basically into the next round of debates, even though he doesn't have 15% of the polls, which is the cutoff for that. He is also pushing hard for there to be a change in the rules around what are called superdelegates. And these are the Democratic Party poobahs and insiders and so on who all have their votes that aren't necessarily committed by the state primaries and things like that. And so if he can get those, then he could come in. Now, what I reckon...
So when would be the cutoff? Sorry. When would be the last possible moment he could come in without
different states
sacrificing
have
so many
different
delegates?
I mean, he is in, but I don't know what his filing is. He's got to file for different states to go in, so to get into those. But the point is, though, is that this benefits Bloomberg because everybody else here is caught up in the chaos. And I reckon there's a very good case to be made, frankly, that many people within the Democratic Party are looking at this mess. They're saying Trump is doing very well in the polls. The economy is doing well. We are not looking like we've got anybody who can actually win this thing. Bloomberg has an absolute pile of money, Jack, an absolute billions of dollars. I mean, Trump is a billionaire at the low end. Bloomberg is a billionaire many more times over. So he's seriously wealthy, and he's vowed to do this thing. So I reckon the Democrats might be looking at this and say, he will spend a fortune. He probably won't win, but what he'll do is he'll lay down so much cover fire that what he'll do is he'll enable us to take back the Senate, hold the House and get some gains there, and then continue 4 years of resistance because we don't have anything bigger than anti-Trump. We don't actually have a coherent program
like how you
of
said
governance.
us. As if you're the...
Well, that's what they're saying. That's how they'd be speaking.
Have you seen this issue with voter turnout at Iowa?
For whom?
For this particular caucus.
Yeah, but for which side?
For all of them.
Well, the Republicans did really, really well. They had huge numbers of votes come out for Trump.
The Democrats are down.
But the Democrats are down.
And so everyone's now talking about what does this mean for 2020 when the final candidate, when they're left a bit tattered? Because we had a big issue where Bernie Sanders supporters, they felt really dudded. And then they didn't rock up to the polls. They felt their choice was taken away from them. They didn't want to back Hillary Clinton.
Exactly.
And that really helped Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I think what the Democrats were thinking was going to happen is you're going to see record turnout in Iowa. And that hasn't happened. That hasn't transpired. And that's a little bit of a worrying sign for all of the candidates.
Because, it just shows that just simply being oppositional to Trump isn't enough to get you alive. But you know what I think is really interesting, though? I just want to go back to this Russia thing because I'm absolutely loving it. I'm going to read a tweet here.
Is this that the Russians hacked them?
Well, yeah, there's a number of... But I'm just here's one from Maggie Haberman at the New York Times. One thing to consider amid the caucus snafu, the president has thrown accelerant on distrust of institutions, and this is another one. He has highlighted the Dem Party ills around this caucus in tweets. So after obsessively going on and on and on about the Russians hacking an election, the Democrats have managed to hack their own election, and somehow it's Trump that's responsible for people being distrustful of this. I mean, it is absolutely hilarious.
The other crazy thing about that is the suggestion that Trump criticizing what this was as in terms of a disaster is so bad because it throws the integrity of it.
Yeah.
They made it a disaster. Sorry, this should be called out. This has been a disaster. And apparently there were elderly people who didn't know how they didn't know how to put in all the details and stuff, and then the app would freeze, so their votes weren't counted.
The app was a dud. The app was designed by idiots.
They didn't explain the process was overly
complicated. And now here's Richard Stengel. So he used to be managing editor of Time magazine. He worked for Obama for a while, and now he's with MSNBC, which is the chief resistance TV station in America. The two guys happiest with the Iowa results are Donald Trump and his pal, Vladimir Putin. Oh, for God's sake, are we still doing this? Please don't subscribe to conspiracy theories launched by either of them. Simple human incompetence is almost always the right explanation. Well, sure, fine, Richard, but, again, you cannot go on for years and years and years and years about how the Russians have been hacking elections and all of this stuff, and then have such an absolute colossal disaster, which just happens to hurt the insurgent Democrat Party candidate when you yourself are a Barack Obama former staffer and insider, and say, oh, no, we can't have any conspiracy theories here, there's nothing to see here, it's all fine. I mean, honestly, Jack, what do you think of that?
Look, I think that conspiracy theories probably should be looked at because it's been such a disgrace. I want to hear all of them.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah, I mean, and it's like, but you're not a Russian stooge for thinking there's something really fishy about what went down here. How many
conspiracy theories have the Democrats thrown at Donald Trump that haven't stuck? And then we have had a disaster here. We have had an app that was developed by a former Hillary Clinton staffer who, by the way, they were manipulating the process. That journalist who was leaking the questions to Hillary Clinton before the debate. I forget her name, but she was
the CNN one. Yep.
She was on. I think she did a segment with Fox where she was saying, "Oh, this is disaster because people are going to think that the Democrats are rigging it." It's just like, hang on,
heaven forbid,
you were rigging it.
You were rigging
You were
it.
leaking questions to Hillary Clinton. So look, there are conspiracy theories. Fair enough, that are completely, out of the realms of possibility, and then there are legitimate questions that should be asked. Now, was this? I'm
just looking to see if we've got an update, by the way, here. So now it still seems to be about the same here, but this whole idea that they're only releasing partial results too, this just takes the wind out of the sails of pretty much everybody. They're all hoping for a big do-over in New Hampshire.
That's what I think. I think Pete Buttigieg is being dudded if he does end up winning because this was his moment. Good on him for managing to galvanise the roads. Well, but Bernie didn't win it. He's done well.
We don't know what he's done. We don't know who's won it. Who's won it, Jack? Tell me definitively, Jack. Who has won this thing?
Well, when you get to 62% of the vote, it's a pretty good trajectory, but it is neck and neck.
It's neck and neck. We don't know what booths have turned in and what booths have turned out. How many? I mean, we've both watched enough election nights to know that things can change. But. Either way, whatever the point is there. I mean, this is basically like Iowa, and I'm just seeing we've got some more results here.
It's 363 for Pete Buttigieg, and it's 338 for Bernie Sanders. It's neck and neck, but he's
yeah. So the
he's a good 2 percent points.
It's very close, but either way, it's terrible news. Who's had a bad night here? Joe Biden. Terrible. And I think that the Joe Biden campaign is almost beyond resuscitation. I think that Elizabeth Warren has been so hit by her honesty issues and everything else. And, I mean, look.
Can we talk about something hilarious with Elizabeth Warren?
Please do. But I was just about to say, like I said at some point that Warren was a likely goer for the nominee. And I just think I just don't see how she has a way through now. I think she's too damaged. But what are you going to say about Warren?
Well, she's damaged because her credibility keeps getting called into question time and time again.
Because she's a liar.
Because she's a liar. Now, so she's one of these people that wants to come up with a multi-trillion-dollar Green Deal that it would essentially be this massive funding pool that other countries could dip into. Yep. So you could say you could be sitting here in Australia. They probably wouldn't. It'd probably be more third world countries. But say, hypothetically, you could be sitting here in Australia.
Yeah.
You want to do some kind of solar panel scheme. Then you would go and take Americans' hard-earned tax dollars and take it back to Australia.
It would be like a clean energy finance corporation, but for the world.
For what we've seen, I don't know if you remember that carbon scheme in the UK, but I covered it when I was over there. It ended up being this massive Ponzi scheme where they were moving carbon credits around, and a lot of them are in jail now. But something like that's going to end up being hijacked.
That, or like Solyndra in California, which is another famous one. I mean, so many of these things turn out to be scams.
She's built herself up, and so has Bernie Sanders, as a champion for the radical left, which want massive reductions in carbon emissions without really
and also
using,
but really what they want, for them, it's about the environment, but it's not really about the environment. For them, I think a lot of it is about using the environment as an excuse to reorganize the economy.
Exactly.
When I interviewed Extinction Rebellion protesters in last year when they were in Sydney, when they were doing their demonstrations, a lot of them were very frank that that really the end game wasn't just cutting emissions, fine, but the end game was actually about production is going to be owned by the state. Parliament is going to be dissolved for people's committees. This is actually what they want.
You have a chat with them for more than 5 minutes, and the end goal becomes clear. But the really interesting thing here is with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders is they've just been papped getting into private jets.
Yep.
So this is the whole thing. You set your image up to be a champion of the environment, and then you cruise around on private jets. People don't like that. It's really hypocritical. There are other ways to do it. You can hop in a bus. You seriously can.
Well, it's like...
You seriously can. There are other ways. You don't need a private jet flying you around. If you're going to go and say to the American people, well, I'm sorry, but you live too lavishly, and now we're going to tax you to make up for your carbon emissions. hold my coffee, no keep cup. I'm just going to go hop in this jet and cruise around America.
And Jack,
it's ludicrous. It is a ludicrous, hypocritical stance to take. And those photos alone are damaging. And Bernie Sanders, he was papped hopping in one as well.
Of course, they all have them.
These are two people who don't practice what they preach.
Look, as I always say, I will take climate change seriously when the people who tell me to take climate change seriously act like they do. But as we all remember from the old days of the Soviet Union, you know, Moscow's commissars would sit around drinking vodka and eating caviar while everybody else stood on the bread lines. I think that's a great note to end it on. Chaos out of Iowa. It will continue. We're going to have a State of the Union address tonight as well, but we don't have time for that because we don't know what he's going to say yet. So
we don't know
what he's going to say, but I'll tell you what, he's going to be laughing at those Democrats, I reckon. Anyway, Jack Houghton, another great week. We will see you next week. Send us your feedback, comment on the video, and we will be reading more of that out next week. Great to see you. We'll see you next week.